The fence post split clean under Owen Blackwell's axe. Dawn light filtered through the Montana pines, casting long shadows across the northern boundary of his 160 acres. He'd been up since 4, working the way he always worked. Alone. Methodical. The pine post needed replacing before winter, and winter in these mountains came early and stayed late. Owen drove the new post into the frozen ground, his breath forming clouds in the October air. 13 years he'd worked this land. 13 years since he'd filed his claim under the Homestead Act, back when the ground was virgin territory and a man could build something that lasted. The land had cost him nothing but sweat and time. 5 years of cultivation as the law required. Then the deed came through, stamped and official. 160 acres of Montana territory registered to Owen Blackwell in the year of our Lord, 1869. He heard the horses before he saw them. 3 riders emerged from the tree line, moving slow and deliberate across his cleared acreage. Owen's hand instinctively moved to the Winchester rifle leaning against the fence rail. He didn't pick it up. Not yet. But his fingers brushed the stock, a reminder that it was there if needed. The lead rider was Silas Garrett. Owen recognized him immediately. Broad shoulders, expensive leather coat, the kind of man who measured his worth in acres and influence. Behind him rode 2 hired men, the sort who sold their loyalty by the day and their morals by the hour. Silas reined his horse to a stop 20 feet from Owen, close enough to talk, far enough to run if things went wrong. "Blackwell," Silas said. His voice carried the casual confidence of a man who believed he owned everything he looked at. "Nice morning for fence work." Owen said nothing. He'd learned long ago that silence made men nervous, and nervous men revealed their intentions. "I've come on business," Silas continued. He reached into his coat and withdrew a roll of yellowed papers bound with twine. "This land you're standing on, it's not yours." The words hung in the cold morning air like gun smoke. Owen straightened slowly. 6'3" of weathered muscle and mountain patience. 33 years old, with 13 of those years spent working this very ground. His voice, when he finally spoke, came out flat and controlled. "I filed my claim in '69, worked this land for 13 years. It's mine by law and by right." Silas smiled, the kind of smile a wolf gives a rabbit. "Your claim's invalid. These papers here, they're dated 1867, 2 years before you filed. This parcel was claimed by a man named James Mitchell. He died, left it to his widow. I bought it from her last month. Legal and proper." Owen's jaw tightened. He knew James Mitchell. Everyone in the territory knew James Mitchell. The man had died in the winter of '68, frozen to death during a blizzard while checking his trap lines. Mitchell had no wife, no children, no kin of any kind. The man had been as alone as Owen himself. "Mitchell had no widow," Owen said. "Got papers that say otherwise." Silas unrolled the documents just enough to show official-looking seals and signatures. "Surveyor records, purchase agreement, all legal, all binding." Owen stared at the papers. He couldn't read them, not really. Words on a page had always been a struggle for him, letters jumbling together like scattered fence posts. But he knew what he knew. This land was his. He'd bled for it, nearly died for it, buried his wife on the hillside overlooking the creek that ran through the southern pasture. "You've got 60 days, Silas said. His tone shifted, became harder. 60 days to pack your things and clear out. After that, I bring the territorial marshal. And trust me, Blackwell, you don't want that kind of trouble." Behind Silas, one of the hired men spat tobacco juice into Owen's cleared field. A deliberate insult, a test to see if Owen would react. Owen didn't give them the satisfaction. "This creek here," Silas gestured toward the water running through Owen's land. "Only reliable water source for 50 miles. You know what that's worth. Land with water goes for $5, maybe $10 an acre. Land without water, 50 cents if you're lucky. This whole valley needs this creek, and I aim to control it." There it was, the truth beneath the legal papers. Water rights. In Montana territory, water meant survival. It meant cattle could graze, crops could grow, settlements could expand. Without waterland was just dirt, and hope dried up faster than a summer creek. Owen's mind raced through his options. Fight them here now, and he'd hang for murder. Let them take the land, and everything he'd built would vanish like morning frost. Sarah's grave, the cabin he'd constructed log by log, the barn that had taken 2 summers to complete, all of it gone. "Your land or your freedom, Blackwell," Silas said. "Choose wisely." The 3 riders turned their horses and rode back toward the tree line. Silas called over his shoulder, 60 days, not a day more." Owen watched them disappear into the pines. His hand, still resting on the fence post, had gone white-knuckled. A flash of memory hit him. Sarah, 6 years gone now, lying in their bed while consumption ate her from the inside. Her last words had been a whisper. "Promise me you'll keep this land. Build something that lasts." He'd made that promise, and Owen Blackwell did not break his promises. But keeping this promise might cost him everything. The ride into town took an hour. Owen pushed his horse harder than usual, urgency driving him forward. The settlement that had grown up around Samuel Garrett's trading post consisted of maybe 30 buildings scattered along a single main road. A general store, a blacksmith, a saloon that doubled as a boarding house, the kind of place where everyone knew everyone else's business before sunset. Jake Reynolds sat outside the saloon cleaning his rifle. He looked up as Owen dismounted, saw something in his friend's face, and set the rifle aside. "Trouble?" Jake asked. "Silas Garrett paid me a visit this morning." Jake's expression darkened. "What'd he want?" "My land. Claims he's got papers proving he owns it." They moved inside the saloon, away from listening ears. The bartender knew better than to interrupt when 2 men talked in low voices over whiskey. They weren't drinking. Jake leaned back in his chair. "Silas has been buying up properties all through the valley. 12 farms in the last 2 years. Always the same story. Old claims, mysterious widows, legal papers that show up out of nowhere. How's he getting away with it? Because the land office records are 200 miles away in Helena. Takes 2 weeks to ride there and back. By the time anyone can check his papers, he's already moved in and claimed adverse possession. And the territorial judge Silas has him in his pocket. Man owes gambling debts from here to Denver." Owen stared at his untouched whiskey. The situation was worse than he'd thought. "I can't leave the farm for 2 weeks. Harvest season. If I'm not there working the land, Silas will use it against me. Say I've abandoned my claim." "Then you need someone who can go for you." Jake paused. "Someone who can read legal documents. Someone who knows what to look for." "I work alone." "Not anymore, you don't." Jake drummed his fingers on the table. "You hear about old Sam Garrett's gathering tomorrow?" Owen had heard. The whole territory had heard. Samuel Garrett, Silas's father and the settlement's unofficial leader, had declared a wife-choosing ceremony. Every unmarried man of age was expected to attend and select a bride from the available women. It was an old custom born from the harsh reality that these mountain settlements needed families to survive. Women were scarce. Men were plentiful. The ceremony solved that problem with brutal efficiency. "I don't need a wife," Owen said. "Maybe not, but you need someone who can read. And if you don't show up tomorrow, Silas will use that against you too. Say you're not committed to settling here, that you're just passing through. Makes it easier for him to claim your land." Owen saw the trap. Show up to the ceremony and get forced into choosing a bride he didn't want. Don't show up and give Silas ammunition for his legal case. There was no good option. Only different kinds of bad. "There's something else you should know," Jake said quietly. "Thomas Thornton the blacksmith. He's bringing his daughters to the ceremony. Word is Silas holds his debts, $200. Thornton can't pay. Silas told him the debt's forgiven if he brings all his girls to the gathering, make them available for choosing. That's slavery with extra steps. That's survival in Montana territory. Thornton's got 4 daughters, 3 from his new wife, and 1 from his first marriage." Jake paused. "The one from his first marriage, Margaret, she's the one everyone talks about. Not because she's pretty. She's not by their standards, but because Thornton treats her like she's shameful. Won't hardly look at her in public." Owen didn't respond. Other people's family problems were none of his concern. "Here's what matters," Jake continued. "Margaret Thornton can read. Her mother taught her before she died, and from what I hear, she's got a head for numbers and law. Her grandfather was a county clerk back east, taught her how documents work." The pieces clicked together in Owen's mind. A woman who could read legal papers, who understood land claims and property law, who could ride to Helena and copy the records he needed. It was practical, efficient, and it solved two problems at once. "I'll think about it," Owen said. But they both knew he'd already decided. The gathering took place in the wide square at the center of the settlement. By mid-morning it seemed like every person within 40 miles had arrived. Wagons lined the edges, horses tied to every available post. Children ran between the adults while women set out food, and men clustered in groups smoking and talking in low voices. Owen stood at the back of the crowd, separate from the others. He'd come because he had to, but he didn't have to like it. A platform had been erected in front of Samuel Garrett's trading post. The old man himself stood on it now, weathered and gray, but still carrying the authority of someone who'd survived 30 years in these mountains. Samuel was nothing like his son. Where Silas was smooth and calculating, Samuel was direct and honest, the kind of man who built things instead of stealing them. "By the custom of these mountains," Samuel's voice carried across the square, "we gather today to ensure our settlement survives. Winter's coming. Hard times are ahead. Strong families make strong communities. Every able man here will choose himself a wife. Every available woman will be chosen. That's how we've done it for 20 years. That's how we'll do it today." The crowd murmured, some in agreement, others in resignation. Owen scanned the platform. 7 women stood in a line dressed in their best clothes. Most were young, barely 20. Their faces showed a mixture of hope and fear. This ceremony would determine the rest of their lives, and they had no say in the matter. At the far end of the line stood Margaret Thornton. Owen studied her with the same careful attention he gave to surveying land. She was perhaps 22, with dark hair pulled back in a simple braid. Her dress was clean but worn, letting out at the seams where it had been altered multiple times. She kept her eyes down, shoulders slightly hunched, as if trying to make herself smaller, invisible. While Owen watched, a small girl near the platform fell and scraped her knee. The child started crying. People walked past without stopping, too busy with their own concerns to notice one child's pain. Margaret stepped off the platform. She knelt beside the girl, pulling a cloth from her pocket. She cleaned the scrape with gentle hands, whispering something that made the child's tears slow. Then Margaret tore a strip from her own shawl, the fabric already threadbare, and patched and wrapped it around the small knee. The girl smiled. Margaret smiled back. Then she returned to her place on the platform as if nothing had happened. Owen felt something shift in his chest, a memory sharp and painful. Sarah had done the same thing once, helped a sick Indian child when everyone else in the settlement had turned away. Sarah had never cared what people thought of her kindness. She just acted, did what was right because it was right. He looked at Margaret Thornton with new eyes. 3 young trappers near the platform had noticed Margaret's absence. Now they called out to her, their voices carrying across the square. "There she is, Big Margaret. Dance for us, girl. Show us how light you are on your feet. Bet she could crush a man just by rolling over in bed." Laughter rippled through the crowd, cruel and casual. The kind of laughter that came easy when directed at someone everyone agreed was acceptable to mock. Margaret's face flushed red. She clutched a basket she'd been carrying, knuckles white. One of the trappers clapped his hands in rhythm, mimicking a dance beat. Margaret tried to step past them. Her foot caught on her skirt. She stumbled. The basket tipped. Wild onions scattered across the dirt. The laughter grew louder. Margaret dropped to her knees, scrambling to gather the fallen vegetables. Her hands shook. She kept her head down, hiding tears that Owen could see anyway. He'd seen that look before. The look of someone who'd been beaten down so many times they no longer remembered how to stand up straight. Owen's jaw tightened. His hand curled into a fist. Then Margaret gathered the last onion, stood, and hurried away from the crowd. She disappeared behind a supply wagon out of sight, out of the mockery's reach. Owen noticed something the crowd hadn't. While everyone else had laughed or turned away, one person hadn't. An older woman, Mrs. Fletcher, stood near the platform with sad eyes and a knowing expression. She watched Margaret disappear, then shook her head slowly, as if remembering her own story, her own pain. "Attention!" Samuel Garrett's voice cut through the noise. "The choosing begins now." The square fell silent. This was the moment everyone had come to see. Samuel's eyes swept the crowd and landed on Owen. "Owen Blackwell, step forward." Owen didn't move immediately. Every eye in the settlement turned to look at him. The mountain man who lived alone, the veteran who'd fought in the Indian Wars, the homesteader with the best land and the worst social skills. "You've proven yourself in these mountains," Samuel continued. 13 years you've survived, winters that killed lesser men. You've earned the right to choose first." Owen walked forward slowly. He could feel Silas Garrett's eyes on him from somewhere in the crowd, could feel the weight of expectation pressing down. This was a test, a trap, a moment that would define everything that came after. He reached the platform and looked at the 7 women standing there. 6 were young and hopeful, stealing glances at him with a mixture of interest and calculation. 1 stood apart, eyes down, already resigned to being the last chosen or not chosen at all. "Make your selection," Samuel said. "No." The word came out flat. Final. Samuel's eyebrows rose. "No. I came to trade pelts, not to take a wife." A ripple of shock moved through the crowd. Men who refused the choosing ceremony were exiled from the territory. It was the unwritten law. Participate or leave. Those were the only options. Samuel stepped closer to Owen. His voice dropped low enough that only Owen could hear. "Don't be a fool. You need this settlement, the trading post, the blacksmith, the connections. Silas is already moving against you. Don't give him more ammunition." Owen met the old man's eyes, saw genuine concern there. Samuel might be Silas's father, but he was also fair, honest, the kind of leader these settlements needed. But Owen had lived alone too long, made his own choices too long. The idea of picking a wife, like choosing a horse at auction, stuck in his throat like bad meat. "Every man here will choose," Samuel said, raising his voice for the crowd. "These mountains need strong families. The custom demands it." "I owe no custom," Owen said. Gasps spread through the gathered settlers. Women whispered behind their hands. Men exchanged glances, unsure whether to be impressed or appalled. Samuel's face hardened. "Refuse me here and you'll answer to more than whispers. You'll answer to every man who follows custom while you spit on it." Owen stood silent, unmoved, a wall of muscle and stubbornness. "This isn't about what you want," Samuel pressed. "It's about duty, about building something that lasts. If the strongest man among us refuses, what hope do the rest have?" The silence stretched, became uncomfortable, became electric with tension. Then Silas Garrett's voice cut through the quiet. He'd moved to the front of the crowd, positioning himself where everyone could see. "Perhaps Blackwell doesn't feel worthy of a proper wife." Silas's tone dripped false sympathy. "Perhaps he should take the charity case." Silas pointed directly at Margaret Thornton. "Even she stands here with courage. What excuse have you left, mountain man?" The crowd erupted. Some laughed. Others looked uncomfortable. Margaret's face went from red to pale. She looked like she wanted the earth to swallow her whole. Owen saw it clearly now. The game Silas was playing. Force Owen to refuse, make him look like an outsider who didn't respect community customs. Or force Owen to choose Margaret in humiliation, making them both look ridiculous. Either way, Silas won. Either way, Owen standing in the settlement took damage. But Silas had made a mistake. He'd assumed Owen cared about mockery, about what people thought, about fitting in. Owen Blackwell had stopped caring about those things the day he buried his wife. He looked at Margaret, really looked at her, saw past the worn dress and hunched shoulders, saw the woman who'd helped a crying child, saw the intelligence in her eyes hidden beneath layers of shame and self-protection, saw someone who needed protecting, someone genuine. And he remembered Jake's words. She can read, she understands law, she's exactly what you need. Owen turned to face the crowd. His voice carried clear and strong across the silent square. Her, Margaret Thornton. I choose her. The words hit like a thunderclap. Total silence. Then chaos. Laughter exploded through the gathering, louder than before, wilder. Men slapped their knees. Women covered their mouths in shock and glee. Children pointed and giggled without understanding why. Did he say her? Out of 7 choices. The man's been alone too long, lost his senses. Poor fool doesn't know what he's done. Silas Garrett's smile spread wide. This was even better than he'd hoped. The mountain man had just made himself a laughingstock. But Samuel Garrett, watching from the platform, saw something else in Owen's eyes. Saw calculation, saw purpose, saw a man who'd just made a choice for reasons no one else understood. The choice is made, Samuel announced, his voice cutting through the laughter. Witnessed by all, Owen Blackwell has chosen Margaret Thornton as his wife. By the laws and customs of this territory they are bound. He stamped his boot against the wooden platform. The sound echoed like a judge's gavel. Margaret stood frozen. Her breath came in short, panicked gasps. Tears streamed down her face. Not tears of joy, tears of humiliation and confusion and fear. Why? Why would he do this? Was this some elaborate joke? Would he mock her too once they left the square? Owen walked to the platform and offered his hand. She stared at it like it might bite her. Come, he said quietly. Just that one word. No explanation, no reassurance, just a simple command. Margaret took his hand. Her fingers trembled. They walked through the crowd together. The laughter followed them like a pack of wolves. Every step felt like walking through mud, through shame, through a gauntlet of cruel eyes and crueler words. Give him a season and he'll be begging to give her back. What a waste. A man like that could have had any woman. She'll eat him out of house and home by winter. Owen didn't react, didn't defend, didn't explain. He just kept walking, his hand steady on Margaret's elbow, guiding her through the hostile crowd. As they passed, Owen caught sight of Thomas Thornton, Margaret's father. The blacksmith stood with his back turned, one hand covering his face. Ashamed, relieved. A complicated mixture of emotions that Owen didn't have time to decipher. They reached Owen's horse. He helped Margaret mount, then swung up behind her. The horse shifted under the extra weight, but held steady. As they prepared to ride out, a small figure darted through the crowd. Little Anne, the girl Margaret had helped earlier, ran up to them. She held out a wildflower, crushed but still colorful. "Thank you for being kind to me, Miss Margaret," the girl said. Margaret took the flower. Fresh tears spilled down her cheeks. But these tears were different. These came from something other than shame. Owen guided the horse away from the settlement, away from the laughter, away from the gathering that would be talked about for years to come. Behind them, Silas Garrett watched from the platform. His smile had faded. Something about Owen's choice bothered him. The mountain man was supposed to be simple, straightforward, easy to predict. But that choice? That hadn't been simple at all. The trail to Owen's homestead wound upward into the mountains. The noise of the settlement faded, replaced by the sound of wind through pine trees and the steady rhythm of horse hooves on packed earth. Margaret sat rigid in the saddle. She hadn't spoken since they left, hadn't looked back. Her hands gripped the saddle horn so tightly her fingers had gone white. Owen let the silence stretch. Words had never been his strength. Action was, decision was. But words were like trying to catch smoke. After a mile, he reined the horse to a stop. A small clearing opened up beside the trail, private and hidden from view. "You can breathe now," Owen said. Margaret didn't move. "I didn't choose you to mock you." That got a reaction. She turned slightly, just enough to look at him from the corner of her eye. Suspicious, waiting for the other boot to drop. "Then why?" Her voice came out barely above a whisper. Owen dismounted, stood beside the horse looking up at her. This conversation needed to happen here away from the settlement before they reached his land. "My land's being threatened. Silas Garrett claims he owns it, says he's got papers proving it." Margaret's expression shifted. Some of the fear receded, replaced by confusion. "The land office papers. You know about such things?" "My grandfather was a county clerk. He taught me to read legal documents." She paused. "Before he died." Owen nodded. This confirmed what Jake had said. "I can't leave the farm during harvest, but someone needs to ride to Helena, get copies of the official records, check Silas's claim." Understanding dawned across Margaret's face. "You need someone who can read. That's worth more to me right now than anything else." "And after?" She swallowed hard. "When the land is safe?" Owen considered the question. Honesty seemed like the right approach. "I don't know, but you'll be safer with me than you would have been with him." Margaret's brow furrowed. "With who?" "Silas. Your father owes him $200. Silas was going to take you as payment. One way or another, you would have ended up his. At least this way you had a choice, even if it didn't feel like one." The blood drained from Margaret's face. She'd suspected her father's debts were bad, but she hadn't known the details, hadn't known she'd already been sold. "Did my father know?" "I'd wager he did." Margaret looked away, stared at the trees, at the mountains, at anything but Owen's face. "I won't hurt you," Owen said quietly. "I won't mock you. I need help. You need protection. That's the arrangement, simple as that." "Nothing about this is simple." "No," Owen agreed, "but it's honest. And honest is all I've got to offer." She studied him for a long moment, looking for deception, for cruelty, for the trap she knew had to be there somewhere. But Owen just stood there, patient, waiting, a mountain of a man who'd just turned both their lives upside down for reasons she barely understood. "Can you ride?" he asked. "Not well." "You'll learn. Winter's coming. We've got work to do." He helped her dismount, then swung back into the saddle. They continued up the trail on foot, the horse following behind. Owen adjusted his pace to match hers, not rushing, not commenting when she stumbled over roots or rocks. By the time they crested the final ridge and Owen's homestead came into view, the sun had started its descent toward the western peaks. Golden light spilled across 160 acres of cleared land forest and possibility. The cabin sat nestled against a hillside built from lodgepole pine logs chinked with mud and moss, 20 feet by 24 feet. One room with a sleeping loft, stone chimney rising from one end, a small porch facing east to catch the morning sun. 50 yards from the cabin stood the barn, larger than the cabin built to house horses, cattle, and winter hay. Stout construction, good roof, the kind of building that took 2 summers to complete. Beyond the barn, a creek cut through the southern pasture, clear water running year-round fed by snowmelt from the peaks. That creek was the reason Silas wanted this land. Control the water, control the valley. "This is it," Owen said. 160 acres, 40 cleared for crops, 20 for grazing, the rest still forested. Margaret stared. She'd never seen land like this. Her father's shop in town sat on a quarter-acre lot. This was a kingdom by comparison. "The cabin's small," Owen continued, "but it's warm, tight, no drafts. You'll sleep in the loft. I'll sleep down below. There's a root cellar out back, full of potatoes, carrots, turnips, enough to last the winter." He walked toward the cabin, still talking. "Practical, matter of fact. Work starts at dawn. Animals need tending, cows need milking, chickens need feeding, eggs need gathering. Can you do any of that? No. You'll learn." Inside the cabin, Margaret found herself in a space both sparse and functional. A table made from a single massive piece of pine, 2 chairs, a stone fireplace with cooking implements hung on iron hooks, shelves holding tin plates, cups, and basic supplies, the loft above accessible by a ladder. Everything was clean, Organized, the home of a man who lived with purpose and little else. Owen set his rifle above the door a practiced motion, then moved to the fireplace to start a fire. He worked with the efficiency of someone who'd done this task 1,000 times. "There's dried beef in that barrel," he said, pointing. "Bread in the crate, help yourself." Margaret didn't move. She stood in the center of the room, still wearing her worn shawl, still holding the crushed wildflower from little Anne. "I don't understand you," she said finally. Owen looked up from the kindling. "Don't need you to understand, just need you to help." "But why me? There were 6 other women, younger, prettier, more useful," Owen finished. "Maybe. But they couldn't read. You can. That makes you more valuable than all of them combined." It wasn't romantic. It wasn't even particularly kind, but it was honest, and Margaret, who'd spent her whole life being lied to about her worth, found strange comfort in that honesty. Owen stood and moved to a wooden chest near his sleeping pallet. He pulled out a rolled bundle of documents yellowed with age and handling. "These are my homestead papers, filed in 1869, survey maps, proof of cultivation, everything the law requires." He spread them on the table. "Read them. Tell me what you see." Margaret approached slowly, sat down at the table, picked up the first document. Her eyes moved across the page, reading. Actually reading. Owen watched her face change as she processed the information. Saw intelligence there, capability, everything that had been hidden under layers of mockery and shame. "These are in order," she said after several minutes. "You filed properly, met all requirements. The land is legally yours. Silas claims his papers are dated 1867, says a man named James Mitchell filed first, then died. Left it to his widow. Silas bought from the widow." Margaret frowned. If Mitchell died without heirs, his claim would have lapsed. Reverted to public domain, Silas's purchase would be invalid. "How do you know that?" "My grandfather taught me how property law works, how inheritance works, how claims can be challenged and validated." She looked up at Owen. "You need to prove Mitchell had no widow, prove his claim lapsed. That requires records from the Helena Land Office. 200 miles, 2 weeks round trip." "I can go," Margaret said. The words came out before she'd fully thought them through, but once spoken, she didn't take them back. "I can read the documents, copy what's needed. You stay here and protect your land." Owen studied her, really studied her. She'd been terrified an hour ago, shaking and crying. Now she sat at his table reading legal documents and proposing solutions. The transformation fascinated him. "It's dangerous," he said. "Long ride, rough country. Silas will have people watching." "Then send someone with me, someone you trust." Owen thought of Jake Reynolds, his old war buddy, the one man in the territory he could count on. "Maybe," Owen said. "We'll see." A knock on the door interrupted them. Hard, urgent, 3 sharp raps that sounded like trouble. Owen grabbed his rifle and moved to the door. Cracked it open just enough to see outside. Silas Garrett stood on the porch. The same 2 hired men from this morning flanked him. None of them had drawn weapons, but all wore guns on their hips, a reminder that violence was always an option. "Blackwell," Silas said, "we need to talk. We talked this morning. That was different. This is official." Silas held up another roll of papers. "Eviction notice, signed by Territorial Judge Harmon. You've got 57 days to vacate the premises." Owen stepped outside, closing the door behind him. Margaret didn't need to see this. "This land is mine." "Not according to the law. My papers prove otherwise." Silas's smile was all teeth. No warmth. "You want to fight this fine. Nearest courthouse is in Helena, 200 miles. By the time you ride there and back, I'll have already moved in. Adverse possession, 9/10 of the law." Owen's hand tightened on his rifle stock, not raising it, just holding it, a silent statement of intent. "That woman you chose," Silas continued. "Margaret. Shame if something happened to her while you were away in Helena. Accidents happen on these mountain roads. People disappear." The threat hung in the air like smoke. Owen took one step forward. Silas's hired men tensed, hands moved toward gun belts. "You threaten her again," Owen said quietly. "I'll kill you, and them, and anyone else you send. That's not a threat. That's a promise." Silas held Owen's stare for a long moment, then he smiled. "See you in court, Blackwell, if you have the spine to show up." They mounted their horses and rode away. Owen stood on his porch watching until they disappeared into the tree line. Behind him the cabin door opened. Margaret stepped out. "I heard," she said. "Figured you did." "He's going to take this place, take everything you've built." "He's going to try." Margaret moved to stand beside him, smaller than him by almost a foot, softer by every measure, but her voice when she spoke carried steel underneath the uncertainty. "Then we'd better have a plan." Machuchi. Part 2. The Siege. Dawn came cold and gray the morning after Margaret and Jake Reynolds rode for Helena. Owen stood on his porch watching the horizon where they'd disappeared hours earlier. The mountains swallowed travelers whole in these parts, swallowed them and sometimes never gave them back. He turned to face his land, 160 acres that needed constant attention. The wheat in the south field stood ready for harvest, golden stalks bending under their own weight. Every day he delayed meant more grain lost to weather and birds. Every day he waited was a day Silas could use against him. Owen walked to the barn and gathered his tools, a scythe with a blade he'd sharpened the night before, leather gloves worn soft from years of use, a canteen of water. The work would take him 3 days if he pushed hard, 4 if he did it right. He chose to do it right. The scythe cut through wheat stalks with a rhythmic whisper. Swing and sweep, swing and sweep. Owen fell into the pattern his body knew, letting his mind wander to problems that wouldn't solve themselves. Silas had 57 days to make his move. But men like Silas didn't wait for deadlines. They created opportunities, forced mistakes, pushed until something broke. The first day passed without incident. Owen harvested 2 acres of wheat, binding the stalks into sheaves and stacking them in rows. His shoulders ached, his hands blistered despite the gloves. But the work felt good, honest, the kind of labor that built things instead of tearing them down. That night, he ate cold beans and hard bread, checked the perimeter of his property on foot rifle in hand, looking for signs of intrusion. Found nothing but deer tracks and the prints of a mountain lion heading north toward higher elevations. The second day brought clouds, low and heavy, promising early snow. Owen worked faster, racing against weather that could ruin an entire harvest in hours. By noon, he'd cleared another acre. By sunset, another half. The stacks of bound wheat grew into a small city of golden towers. Inside the cabin that night, Owen tried not to notice how quiet everything had become. For 2 days, Margaret had cooked simple meals, asked questions about the land, read through his legal documents with a focus that reminded him of scholars he'd seen in his youth. Her presence had filled spaces he hadn't realized were empty. Now those spaces echoed again. Owen pushed the thought aside. Sentiment was a luxury he couldn't afford, not with Silas circling like a wolf waiting for the herd to show weakness. The third day started the same as the others. Dawn, coffee, the walk to the south field with tools and determination. Owen had maybe 6 more hours of harvesting before the wheat was in. Then he'd need to thresh it, separate grain from chaff, store it for winter. Work that would take another week at least. He was halfway through the morning's cutting when he heard the horse. One rider, coming fast from the north. Owen's straightened hand moving instinctively to the rifle he'd leaned against a fence post. His eyes scanned the tree line. Samuel Garrett emerged from the pines, alone. The old man rode with the stiffness of someone who didn't spend much time on horseback anymore. His face looked troubled. Owen waited. Let Samuel come to him. "We need to talk," Samuel said, reining his horse to a stop at the field's edge. "I'm listening." Samuel dismounted with a grunt, pulled a folded paper from his coat. "Found this in my son's office yesterday. He doesn't know I saw it." He handed the paper to Owen. Financial records, columns of numbers that meant nothing to Owen's eyes. but Samuel explained it anyway. Silas borrowed $10,000 from investors back east, promised them water rights to this valley, told them he'd have control of the creek within 3 months. Samuel paused. That was 2 months ago. Owen understood immediately. Silas wasn't just greedy, he was desperate. Men who owed $10,000 to Eastern investors didn't have the luxury of patience. They had deadlines, consequences, the kind of pressure that made reasonable men do unreasonable things. And Silas had never been reasonable to begin with. He's going to move soon, Samuel continued. Going to do something that forces your hand. I don't know what, but it'll be bad. Probably violent. Why are you telling me this? Samuel's weathered face showed genuine regret. Because he's my son, but that doesn't make him right. I built this settlement on honest work and fair dealing. Silas is destroying everything I tried to create. He met Owen's eyes. Watch yourself. Guard your back. And if you need help, there are still men in this territory who remember what honor means. Samuel mounted his horse and rode away, leaving Owen alone in the wheat field with a warning that felt more like prophecy. That night, gunfire shattered the darkness. Owen woke to the sound of breaking glass. Instinct threw him from his sleeping pallet onto the floor. A bullet punched through the window above where his head had been seconds before. Another shot. Another. The cabin filled with the sharp crack of rifle fire. Owen crawled to where his Winchester leaned against the wall, grabbed it, levered around into the chamber, moved to the broken window, staying low, using the log wall for cover. Outside, muzzle flashes lit the darkness. 3 shooters, maybe 4, spread out in a loose semicircle around the cabin, firing methodically, testing his defenses. Owen counted to 3, then rose fast and fired through the window. His shot cracked into the night. Someone cursed. One of the muzzle flashes stopped. Hit or scared, Owen couldn't tell in the darkness. "Get out, Blackwell!" a voice shouted from the tree line. "This land's not yours. Leave while you still can." Owen didn't waste breath on replies. He moved to the next window, fired again. The Winchester's report was thunder in the small cabin. Another curse from outside. The attackers were pulling back, putting more distance between themselves and Owen's accurate shooting. The firefight lasted maybe 10 minutes. Then silence. Owen stayed low, watching the darkness, counting his remaining ammunition. 44 rounds left. Enough for now, but not enough if this became a regular occurrence. Dawn revealed the damage. 2 windows shattered, 3 bullet holes in the cabin walls. One had punched clean through, exiting near the fireplace. If Owen had been standing in the wrong place, he'd be dead. Outside, he found boot prints in the soft earth. 4 distinct sets. They'd surrounded the cabin, fired from cover, then retreated when Owen's return fire got too accurate. A harassment attack, meant to frighten, not kill, though death would have been an acceptable bonus. Owen walked the perimeter, found where they'd tied their horses, followed their tracks back toward the road that led to town. No surprise there. But the worst discovery came later. Near the barn, he found the broken doors hanging from their hinges. Inside, 2 of his cows were missing, stolen during the chaos of the gunfight while Owen was pinned in the cabin. It was brilliant strategy. Distract the target, steal his resources, weaken him economically while threatening him physically. Silas was showing his hand, showing what he was willing to do. Owen spent the morning boarding up the broken windows with scrap lumber. Inadequate repairs, but they'd keep the wind out. He'd need glass from town, but going to town meant leaving the farm vulnerable. Everything became a calculation now. Every decision weighed against potential cost. 6 days had passed since Margaret and Jake left for Helena. 8 more days before they were scheduled to return. 2 weeks felt like a lifetime when measured in gunfights and stolen cattle. Owen forced himself to continue working. The wheat still needed harvesting. The animals still needed tending. Life didn't pause for threats. Homesteading meant working through fear, through exhaustion, through whatever came. That's what Sarah had done. That's what Owen would do. But that evening, when he went to check the creek, he found new problems waiting. The water flow had dropped. Dramatically. What had been a steady stream now trickled like a dying man's last breath. Owen stared at the nearly dry creek bed, mind racing through possibilities. Drought numb. It was October. Snowmelt from the high country should be feeding the creek for another month at least, which meant someone had interfered upstream. Owen grabbed his rifle and followed the creek north. The land rose steadily, climbing into rougher country where pines grew thick and bears still outnumbered people. He walked 2 miles before he found what he was looking for. A dam, makeshift but effective. Logs and rocks piled across the creek, diverting water away from Owen's property into a side channel that fed nowhere useful. The construction was recent, fresh cut marks on the logs, disturbed earth around the rocks. 2 men sat near the dam, hired guns, the same type who'd attacked the cabin. They saw Owen coming and stood hands moving to weapons but not drawing. Not yet. "Tear it down," Owen said. His rifle wasn't pointed at them, but it wasn't pointed away either. "This here's open range," one of the men replied, tall, lean, face scarred from smallpox. "We got as much right to this water as you. That creek runs through my property. You're stealing water. That's illegal even in Montana territory." The second man spat tobacco juice onto the rocks. Deliberate, insulting. "Prove it's your property. Heard there's some dispute about that." Owen's finger moved to his rifle's trigger guard. Not on the trigger, just close. A warning. "Tell Silas this is illegal. I'm documenting everything." The scarred man laughed. "Document all you want. When you're gone, them documents won't mean nothing." Owen wanted to shoot them. Wanted it with an intensity that surprised him. But shooting them meant murder charges, meant giving Silas exactly what he wanted. A reason to bring in the law. A reason to have Owen arrested and removed from his land. So Owen turned and walked away. But he memorized their faces, marked them in his mind for future reference. That night he waited until full dark. Then he returned to the dam, alone, moving through the forest like the Indian fighters had taught him during the war. Silent, invisible, deadly if necessary. One guard remained, sitting near a small fire rifle across his knees, half asleep. Amateur. Owen could have killed him 6 different ways before the man knew danger was close. Instead, Owen worked in the darkness beyond the firelight, pulling logs, rolling rocks, dismantling the dam piece by piece. The work was hard, back-breaking. His hands split open on rough bark. His back screamed protest. But he kept moving, kept working, driven by the knowledge that his land would die without water. 4 hours later, the guard woke, heard something, stood and peered into the darkness. "Who's there?" Owen was already moving, a shadow among shadows. The guard turned, bringing his rifle up, but Owen was faster. He covered the distance in 3 long strides, slammed his shoulder into the man's chest, drove him backward into the dirt. The guard's rifle discharged into the air. Thunder in the mountain night. Owen grabbed the hot barrel, wrenched it away, and threw it into the creek. Then he grabbed the guard by his shirt front. "Tell Silas his tricks won't work." He shoved the guard away. The man scrambled backward, found his feet and ran, crashed through the underbrush like a spooked elk. Owen finished destroying the dam. By dawn, water flowed freely again through his property. But he knew this was only temporary. Silas would rebuild, try something else. The attacks would continue until one of them broke. 9 days after Margaret and Jake left for Helena, Owen rode into the settlement for supplies. He needed ammunition, needed to let people see he was still standing, still fighting. Showing weakness in these mountains was the fastest way to get buried in them. The telegraph office sat next to the general store. Owen had never used a telegraph in his life. But as he passed, the operator stuck his head out the door. "Mr. Blackwell got a wire for you." Owen's heart rate spiked. Nothing good came from telegrams. He stepped inside the cramped office that smelled like paper and machine oil. The operator handed him a slip of paper with carefully printed words. Owen stared at it, struggling to make sense of the letters. The operator, reading Owen's difficulty, cleared his throat. "Want me to read it to you? Pride warred with necessity. Necessity won. Yes. Helena, stop. Trouble. Stop. Maggie, safe. Stop. Return 3 days. Stop. J. 3 sentences. 18 words. They might as well have been 18 bullets. Trouble. What kind of trouble? Had Silas's reach extended even to Helena? Had they been attacked on the road? Was Margaret actually safe, or was Jake lying to keep Owen from riding north in a rage? And 3 more days. 3 more days of holding this farm alone against whatever Silas threw at him. Owen left the telegraph office and headed for the general store. Inside, he found the usual cluster of men gathered around the stove trading gossip and lies in equal measure. The conversation died when Owen entered. He ignored them, moved to the counter where Jacob Miller, the store owner, waited with nervous eyes. "I need ammunition," Owen said. ".44 caliber, 200 rounds. Miller's eyebrows rose. "That's a lot of ammunition." "That's what I need. Planning a war. Planning to survive one." Miller gathered the ammunition from his stock, counted it out into boxes. While he worked, Owen overheard the men by the stove resuming their conversation in lowered voices. "Heard Silas hired 5 more men yesterday? Brought them in from Denver." "What's he need 5 more men for?" "Whatever he's planning, it ain't legal. That Blackwell fella won't last the month. Mark my words." Owen paid for his ammunition without comment, loaded it into his saddlebags. As he prepared to mount his horse, Thomas Thornton emerged from his blacksmith shop across the street. Margaret's father looked older than Owen remembered, thinner, like guilt had been eating him from the inside. "Mr. Blackwell," Thomas called. "A word." Owen waited, gave nothing. Thomas approached slowly, uncomfortable. "I wanted to ask about Margaret. Is she well?" "She's in Helena, getting the documents that'll prove this land is mine." Thomas blinked. "You sent her to Helena?" "She volunteered, said she could read the land office records. She was right." Something like pride flickered across Thomas's face, quickly suppressed. "She never told me she could read law documents. Her grandfather taught her, I suppose. Back before—" He trailed off. "Before you remarried and stopped seeing her as a daughter." Owen's voice carried no judgment, just observation. Thomas flinched. "I was weak. Am weak. Silas had me by the throat financially. Still does in some ways. I made choices I'm not proud of." "Then make better choices now." "How?" "Figure it out." Owen mounted his horse and rode back toward his homestead, leaving Thomas standing in the street with questions Owen had no interest in answering. The ride home took an hour. When Owen crested the final ridge and looked down at his property, everything appeared normal. Cabin intact, barn standing, animals grazing in the pasture. But something felt wrong. That instinct soldiers developed in combat. The sense that danger was close even when nothing obvious threatened. Owen approached his cabin carefully, rifle ready, eyes scanning. He dismounted 50 yards out and walked the rest of the way on foot. At the well beside the cabin, he drew water for his horse. The bucket came up full. He poured some into his hand, brought it to his lips. The taste hit immediately. Bitter. Wrong. Chemical. Owen spat the water onto the ground, stared at the well with growing fury. Someone had poisoned his water supply. While he was in town, while he was visible and accounted for. Silas's men had come onto his property and contaminated the one thing every homestead needed to survive. He checked the livestock trough. The cattle wouldn't drink from it. They stood in the pasture looking uncomfortable, lowing with confusion. Animals knew poison when they tasted it. Owen's water supply was gone. The creek still flowed, but barely. Not enough for both household use and livestock. And winter was coming. Without water, he'd lose everything before snow even fell. 12 days after Margaret left, Owen woke to the sound of horses. Many horses, coming from multiple directions. He rolled from his sleeping pallet and grabbed his rifle in one motion. Moved to the window. Gray dawn light revealed shapes moving through the mist. 8 riders, maybe more, surrounding the cabin in a loose circle. Silas Garrett sat his horse at the front. Even at 100 yards, Owen recognized him. "Last chance, Blackwell." Silas's voice carried across the cold morning air. "Sign over the deed. You can leave with your life." Owen moved to the gun cabinet, took down his shotgun, loaded it with buckshot, set it near the front window, went back for more ammunition. His cabin had become a fortress. He'd make it an expensive fortress to breach. "Where's your proof?" Owen shouted back through the broken window. "Where's that wife of yours with the papers?" So Silas knew Margaret had gone to Helena, had probably known all along, had probably sent men after her. That thought made Owen's blood run cold, but he pushed it aside. Focus on the immediate threat, deal with distant problems when they became present ones. "1 hour," Silas shouted. "Then we come in." The riders dispersed, took positions around the cabin at various distances, setting up a siege. Owen had fought in sieges during the war, knew how they worked, knew how they ended. The defender eventually ran out of ammunition or food or water or will. The attacker just had to wait. But Owen had one advantage. He knew this ground, knew every angle, every line of sight, every field of fire. The first hour passed in tense silence. Owen moved between windows watching the riders. They stayed out of rifle range. Patient, following orders. Then at precisely 1 hour, smoke began rising from the direction of the barn. Owen's heart sank. They'd set fire to his barn, all his winter hay, his stored grain, the structure he'd spent 2 summers building, all of it turning to smoke and ash while he watched from the cabin, helpless to stop it. The psychological warfare had begun. Over the next hour, Silas's men methodically destroyed everything outside the cabin. They shot Owen's chickens for sport, killed one of his horses, shattered the water pump with rifle fire. Every hour that passed, they eliminated another piece of Owen's survival infrastructure. "Every hour you hold out, we kill something else," Silas shouted. "How long can you watch your life burn?" Owen didn't answer. He conserved ammunition, returned fire only when targets presented themselves clearly. He hit 2 of Silas's men in the first 3 hours, wounded them badly enough they had to be helped away. That made the others more cautious. But it didn't stop them. By noon, the barn was a smoking ruin. By mid-afternoon, they'd advanced close enough to take shots at the cabin itself. Bullets punched through walls, shattered what remained of the windows. Owen moved constantly, never staying in one place long enough to become a target. His left shoulder took a graze around hour 4. Not deep, but it bled steadily, weakening him. He wrapped it with a torn shirt and kept fighting. By hour 5, they'd reached the cabin walls. Owen heard boots on the porch, heard someone trying the door. He fired through the door. Wood exploded. A man screamed. The boots retreated. Owen counted his remaining ammunition: 23 rifle rounds, 11 shotgun shells, 8 revolver rounds. Not enough. Not nearly enough. He thought about Sarah, about the promise he'd made to keep this land, about building something that lasted. He'd failed. Despite everything, he'd failed. The cabin door shuddered under an impact. They were trying to break through. Owen grabbed the shotgun, aimed at chest height, waited. Another impact. The door held. Barely. Owen's finger tightened on the trigger. This was how it ended. In violence and failure. Alone. Just like he'd always been. Then he heard new gunshots. Different guns. Different directions. A voice boomed across the homestead. "Federal Marshal, cease fire immediately." Owen moved to the window, blinked against the smoke and setting sun. Riders approached from the east, 5 of them. The lead rider wore a tin star on his chest that caught the dying light. Behind the marshal rode Jake Reynolds. And beside Jake, mounted on a tired horse, came Margaret. She was alive. Whole. Here. The siege scattered. Silas's hired guns mounted their horses and started to retreat, but the marshal's deputies had flanked them, cut off their escape routes. Within minutes, the shooting stopped entirely, replaced by shouted orders and the metallic click of handcuffs. Owen stumbled out of the cabin. His shoulder bled through the makeshift bandage. Smoke from the burning barn stung his eyes, but he walked forward, rifle still in hand, because that's what survivors did. They kept moving. Margaret dismounted and ran toward him. Actually ran. Her travel-worn dress caught on brush. She didn't care. She reached Owen and stopped suddenly, uncertain. Then she saw the blood on his shoulder. "You're hurt." "I'm alive." "The barn." It's just wood. Wood can be rebuilt. Marshal Henry Crawford, a man of perhaps 55 with gray in his beard and authority in his bearing, surveyed the scene with experienced eyes. The burned barn, the destroyed infrastructure, the bullet-scarred cabin, Owen standing in the middle of it all, bleeding but unbroken. "Mr. Blackwell?" the marshal asked. Owen nodded. "I'm Marshal Crawford, federal jurisdiction. This here's quite a mess you've got." "Not my mess. Silas Garrett's mess." "So I'm told." Crawford gestured to his deputies. "Bring Garrett here." They dragged Silas forward. The would-be land thief's confidence had evaporated. He looked smaller now, diminished, a man whose schemes had collapsed around him. "Marshal," Silas started, "this man is trespassing on my legal property. I was merely defending my claim." "We'll see about that." Crawford turned to Margaret. "Ma'am, you said you have documents." Margaret pulled a leather satchel from her horse, opened it carefully. Inside were papers, many papers, copies of official records stamped with territorial seals. She spread them on the ground in front of the marshal. Her voice when she spoke was steady, professional, the voice of someone who knew exactly what she held. "These are the official land office records from Helena. James Mitchell filed a homestead claim in 1867. That part is true." She pointed to one document. "But Mitchell died in December 1868. His death certificate is here. The record clearly states he died without heirs. No wife, no children, no surviving relatives." She pulled out another document. "When a homestead claimant dies without heirs before completing the 5-year cultivation requirement, the claim automatically lapses, reverts to public domain. That happened in 1869. Margaret looked up at the marshal. Owen Blackwell filed his claim in April 1869, 4 months after Mitchell's claim lapsed. His claim is valid, legal, uncontestable. She turned to face Silas. For the first time since Owen had met her, Margaret looked directly at someone who'd tried to harm her without flinching, without shame. "The widow Silas claims to have purchased from—" "She doesn't exist. Never existed. The surveyor's signature on Silas's documents forged. I checked with the Surveyor General's office. The real surveyor died in 1870. Someone copied his signature from old documents." Marshal Crawford examined the papers carefully. His expression grew harder with each page. "Mr. Garrett," he said finally, "these documents you've been waving around, they're forgeries. That's a federal crime. Add in attempted murder." He gestured at Owen's shoulder at the burned barn at the bullet-riddled cabin. "I'd say you're looking at 10 years, minimum." Silas's face went white, then red, then purple. "You can't prove murder. I didn't shoot him." "You ordered it. That's conspiracy. Same thing under federal law." "I want a lawyer." "You'll get one, in Helena, after you sit in my jail for a few months waiting for trial." As the marshal's deputies began handcuffing Silas, another rider emerged from the trees. Thomas Thornton mounted on his forge horse, riding hard. He pulled up near the group, breathing heavy. "Marshal," Thomas said, "I need to confess something." Everyone turned to look at him. Thomas dismounted, walked forward with the gait of a man approaching the gallows. He looked at Owen, at Margaret, at Silas. "I helped forge those documents. Silas paid me, threatened me, told me if I didn't help he'd take Margaret. I was weak, scared. I did what he asked." The marshal's expression didn't change. "You're confessing to a federal crime." "Yes, sir, I am. And I'm willing to testify against Silas Garrett in court, tell everything I know, everything he did, everyone he paid off." Thomas turned to Margaret. "I'm sorry. I'm so sorry. I was afraid. But you rode 200 miles through danger to save a man's land. You showed more courage than I've ever had. I'm ashamed to be your father, but I'm proud of who you became despite me." Margaret's eyes filled with tears. She didn't speak, didn't need to. The moment held its own weight. Marshal Crawford considered Thomas for a long moment. "Federal prosecutor might be interested in a deal. Testimony in exchange for reduced charges. But that's not my call. For now, you're under arrest, too." Thomas nodded. held out his wrists for the handcuffs. "Understood." The sun had fully set by the time the marshal's party prepared to leave. Silas and Thomas sat on their horses, hands bound, flanked by armed deputies. Owen stood beside Margaret, watching the man who'd tried to steal everything right away toward justice. Marshal Crawford approached Owen one last time. "You'll need to come to Helena for the trial, 3, maybe 4 months from now. Can you make it?" "I'll be there." "Good." Crawford glanced at the burned barn, the damaged cabin. "This is a hell of a homestead you've got here, worth fighting for." "Yes, sir, it is." The marshal and his prisoners rode away into the darkness. Jake Reynolds stayed behind along with 2 settlers from town who'd ridden out with the rescue party. Samuel Garrett was one of them. The old man dismounted slowly, looked at his son's handiwork, the destruction, the violence, the consequences of greed unchecked. "Owen," Samuel said, "I raised a monster. I'm ashamed." Owen said nothing. Let the old man carry his own weight. "I'll help rebuild the barn. It's the least I can do. I'll bring men, materials, whatever you need." "That's not necessary." "It's necessary for me." Samuel's voice cracked slightly. "I spent 30 years building this settlement on honest principles. My son spent 3 years tearing them down. Let me try to fix at least some of what he broke." Owen looked at the old man, saw genuine remorse there, genuine desire for redemption. He thought about Sarah, about forgiveness, about second chances. "Barn raising next Saturday," Owen said. "Dawn. Bring whoever you can." Samuel nodded, relief visible on his weathered face. "We'll be here." After everyone left, Owen and Margaret stood alone in the ruins of his homestead. The cabin still stood, though barely. The barn was gone. The infrastructure was destroyed. But the land remained. The water still flowed. The foundations still held. Margaret broke the silence first. "You could have died, but didn't. Because I came back. Because you kept your promise." Owen turned to face her. "You rode 200 miles, fought through Silas's men, copied every document I needed. You saved this land as much as any marshal." "We saved it together." Owen nodded slowly. "Yes, we did." For the first time since choosing her at the gathering, Owen truly saw Margaret Thornton, not as a tool, not as a solution to a problem, but as a person, a partner, someone who'd proven herself braver than half the men in Montana Territory. "The cabin's damaged," he said, "but livable. You should rest. You've been riding for days." "What about you? I need to check the animals, make sure they've got water, salvage what I can from the barn." "I'll help." "You don't have to." "Neither do you. But we're doing it anyway. That's what partners do." Owen almost smiled. Almost. "Yes, I suppose it is." They worked side by side in the darkness, 2 people who barely knew each other, bound together by circumstances and choices, building something neither fully understood yet. But understanding could come later. For now, there was work to do. There was always work to do. And for the first time in 13 years, Owen Blackwell wasn't doing it alone. 2 weeks after the siege, the first snow fell. Owen woke to find the world transformed. White covered everything. The burned remnants of his barn, the scarred cabin walls, the torn earth where bullets had chewed the ground. Snow had a way of making ugly things look peaceful, hiding violence under beauty, making fresh starts look possible. He stood on his porch, coffee steaming in the cold air, and watched dawn paint the mountains pink and gold. Margaret emerged from the cabin behind him, wrapped in a wool blanket he'd given her. She'd taken to rising early, matching his schedule without complaint. "It's beautiful," she said. "It's early. Snow this early means hard winter ahead." Owen had seen enough Montana winters to read the signs. When snow came in mid-October instead of November, when it fell thick and stayed instead of melting off the mountains, were giving warning. Prepare or perish. Those were the only options these peaks offered. He turned to face Margaret. She'd been here 2 weeks now. 2 weeks of working together, eating together, existing in the same small space, learning each other's rhythms. She cooked better than he did. He taught her how to milk the remaining cows. She kept the accounts. He maintained the tools. A partnership built on necessity was slowly becoming something more comfortable. "We need that barn up in 3 weeks," Owen said. "Maybe less. Livestock can't survive winter without shelter. If we don't have proper storage, the hay I salvaged will rot. The animals will starve. Everything falls apart." Samuel said he'd bring men for the barn raising. "Samuel says a lot of things. We'll see what shows up Saturday." Margaret studied him. "You don't trust easily. Trust gets you killed in these mountains. I'm here, aren't I? You trusted me to ride to Helena." Owen nodded slowly. She had a point. He'd gambled on her capability, her honesty, her courage, and she'd proven all three. Maybe trust wasn't the weakness he'd always thought it was. Maybe it was just another tool, useful when applied correctly, dangerous when misused. "Saturday," he said. "We'll see." The days between the first snow and the barn raising Saturday moved with brutal efficiency. Owen worked from dawn until dark, salvaging what he could from the burned barn: lumber that wasn't completely charred, hardware that could be reused, hinges and nails and brackets pulled from ash and ruin. Margaret worked beside him when she could, sorted hardware, cleaned tools, managed the household tasks that kept them fed and functional. But Owen noticed her watching him, studying how he assessed damage, how he prioritized repairs, how he made decisions about what could be saved and what had to be scrapped. She was learning, not just tasks, but thinking, the kind of practical problem-solving that separated survivors from corpses in this country. 3 days before the barn raising, Thomas Thornton appeared. Owen was replacing a fence post when he heard the horse. His hand moved to his rifle. Instinct. These days every unexpected visitor carried potential threat, but it was just Thomas, alone, unarmed, looking older than his 51 years. The blacksmith dismounted with the stiffness of someone carrying more than physical weight. "Owen," Thomas said, "I need to talk." Owen drove the post deeper with his hammer, didn't stop working. "I'm listening." "I came to ask you something." Thomas paused, struggled with words. "Teach me." Owen looked up. "Teach you what?" "How to work land, how to survive out here, how to be—" Thomas gestured helplessly at Owen's homestead. "How to be strong, like you." Owen set down his hammer, studied Thomas carefully. The blacksmith had been arrested alongside Silas, but the marshal had released him 2 days later pending testimony. Thomas would face charges eventually, but for now, he was free. Free and desperate to make something right in a life that had gone wrong. Why? Because I was weak. Let fear control me. Let a man like Silas make me do things that still make me sick to think about. Thomas met Owen's eyes. "My daughter rode 200 miles to save your land. She showed more courage than I've had in my entire life. I want to be someone she can be proud of, but I don't know how." Owen picked up his hammer again, considered the request. Teaching meant time. Time meant vulnerability. Time meant trusting someone he had every reason not to trust. But he thought about Sarah, about how she'd always believed people could change if given the chance, about how redemption required someone willing to offer it. "Tomorrow," Owen said. "Dawn. Come ready to work." Thomas's face showed relief so profound it was almost painful to witness. "Thank you." "Don't thank me yet. If you can't keep up, I won't slow down. This land doesn't care about your feelings, only cares if you're willing to bleed for it." "I understand." Thomas rode away. Margaret emerged from the cabin. She'd heard everything. "That was kind," she said. "That was practical. If he learns something useful, maybe he'll stop making stupid choices. Fewer stupid choices means fewer problems for everyone." Margaret smiled slightly. "You can call it practical if it makes you feel better. I'll call it what it is." Owen didn't ask what she meant. He already knew. Thomas arrived the next morning before dawn. Owen was ready. He'd planned a full day of education. the kind that would test whether Thomas's desire for change was genuine or just guilt-talking. They started with fence repair, simple work, physical, the kind of labor that revealed character quickly. Fence posts need to go 4 feet deep, Owen explained. Shallower than that, frost heaves them out of the ground come spring. You waste your time and materials. He demonstrated, digging the hole, setting the post, checking it with a level, packing earth tight around the base. Thomas watched carefully, then tried it himself. The first hole was too shallow. Owen made him dig it again. The second post leaned crooked. Owen made him reset it. The third attempt was acceptable, not perfect, but good enough to last. "Everything you build out here has to last," Owen said. "No second chances, no easy fixes. You do it right the first time or you do it over. Winter doesn't wait for you to learn from mistakes." They moved to the creek. Owen showed Thomas how to read water flow, how to identify where erosion would undercut banks, how to spot signs of animals using the water, how to measure flow rate with nothing but a stick and timing. "This creek is life," Owen said. "Control the water, control the land. That's why Silas wanted it. That's why men will kill for it. Water's more valuable than gold out here." Thomas listened, asked questions, good questions, the kind that showed he was thinking, not just memorizing. By noon, they were working soil assessment. Owen taught Thomas how to squeeze dirt in his fist, how to read the way it crumbled, how to judge fertility by color and texture and smell. Black soil means vegetation's been rotting for years, rich, good for crops. Red soil means clay, holds water but hard to work. Sandy soil drains fast, good for some things, bad for others. Owen scooped a handful of earth from his field. "This here's good soil. Took 13 years to build it up. Every year I added manure, rotated crops. Let sections rest. Land's like a bank account. Keep taking withdrawals without making deposits, you end up broke." Thomas absorbed it all. His hands blistered, his back ached, but he kept working, kept learning. Owen recognized that determination. It was the same drive that had kept Owen alive through winters that killed weaker men. They broke for a simple lunch, cold meat and bread, water from the creek. Thomas sat heavily, breathing hard. "My father never taught me these things," Thomas said. "Just blacksmithing, how to work metal. Nothing about land, nothing about survival." "You teaching your daughters blacksmithing?" Thomas shook his head. "Didn't think it was proper. Women's work is different, I thought. Margaret can read legal documents, keep accounts, copy official records without making errors. That's skilled work, valuable work. She saved this homestead as much as any rifle did." Thomas looked toward the cabin where Margaret was hanging laundry to dry. "I was ashamed of her, because she wasn't pretty, because people mocked her. I let their judgment become mine. Shame's a choice, like everything else. How do I fix it? You're here, aren't you? Learning, trying. That's a start." Owen stood. "Come on, day's not over. Still got 3 hours of light left." They spent the afternoon on basic carpentry. Owen showed Thomas how to judge lumber quality, how to cut joints that would hold under stress, how to use a hand plane to true a board. The work required precision, patience, the same qualities that made a good blacksmith, just applied differently. By the time Thomas rode away that evening, he moved like someone who'd been beaten. But his expression showed satisfaction, the kind that came from honest work honestly completed. "Same time tomorrow?" Thomas asked. "Same time." Over the next 3 days, 2 more men appeared. Young men. Boys really barely past 20. They'd heard about Owen teaching Thomas, wanted to learn themselves. "Our fathers run the dry goods store and the surveyor's office," one explained. His name was William, tall, gangly, hands soft from indoor work. "We want to file homestead claims, build our own places, but we don't know how." The other was Robert, shorter, stockier, eyes that showed intelligence and ambition in equal measure. "There's land 30 miles north, good land near water, but we'd die our first winter if we tried to settle it now. We need to learn." Owen considered them. Teaching Thomas was one thing, a debt being repaid, a father trying to redeem himself. But these boys, they owed Owen nothing. He owed them nothing. "What makes you think I want to teach you?" William straightened. "Because you know things we need to know. And because every homestead that succeeds makes the territory stronger, makes everyone safer. You benefit from that too." Smart answer. Owen nodded. "Sunday after church, 2 hours. Bring notebooks. You'll want to write things down." The first Sunday class drew 5 students, William and Robert, Thomas, and 2 younger boys, 15 and 16, whose fathers had given permission for them to learn practical skills. Owen hadn't expected an audience, but there they were standing in his yard at dawn on Sunday morning, ready to learn. Margaret had suggested setting up benches, making it formal. Owen had refused. "This isn't school, this is survival training. They learn by doing, not sitting." So the first lesson happened in the field, tool maintenance. Owen laid out his collection, axes, hammers, saws, knives, chisels, every tool a homesteader needed to survive. "First rule," Owen said, "your tools keep you alive. If they break when you need them, you die, so you maintain them, every day, without exception." He picked up an axe. The blade was dull, deliberately so. He'd dulled it for this demonstration. Dull axe is dangerous, bounces off wood instead of cutting clean, bounces into your leg, your foot, your skull. You bleed out before anyone finds you. Owen pulled out a whetstone. "So you sharpen, every day, takes 10 minutes. Those 10 minutes save your life." He showed them the proper angle, the correct stroke, how to test sharpness with a thumb without drawing blood. The students watched intently. Then Owen made each of them sharpen a blade while he watched, corrected their angles, their pressure, their technique. "Good enough to shave with," Owen said, testing William's work. "That's the standard. If it won't shave, it won't work." They moved to rifle maintenance. Owen disassembled his Winchester completely, laid out each piece, explained function and care. "This rifle's kept me alive for 15 years. It's never failed. Know why?" He picked up the bolt. "Because I clean it after every use. Oil it weekly. Check for rust daily. This weapon's more reliable than most men I've known." The lesson continued through noon. By the time Owen dismissed them, every student had disassembled and reassembled a rifle, sharpened 3 different blades, learned how to repair leather harnesses, learned how to splice rope properly. "Next week," Owen said, "we cover water, how to find it, how to test it, how to protect your source. Same time." The students left tired but eager. Owen watched them go with something he didn't quite recognize at first. Then it hit him. Pride. Not in himself, in them, in their willingness to learn things that might save their lives someday. Margaret appeared beside him. "You're building something." "I'm teaching skills, that's all." "No, you're building a legacy. Teaching the next generation how to survive. That matters more than land or buildings. Knowledge lasts longer than lumber." Owen didn't respond, but her words settled into him like stones dropping into still water, ripples spreading outward. Saturday arrived cold and clear, the day of the barn raising. Owen rose earlier than usual, stood on his porch watching the eastern horizon turn from black to gray to pink, wondering if anyone would actually show up. Samuel had promised men, had promised materials, but promises were cheap. Follow through was what mattered. By 6 in the morning, Owen heard horses, many horses, coming from town. He grabbed his rifle habit more than necessity and walked toward the sound. The procession that emerged from the tree line took his breath away. 30 men on horseback, maybe more. They came in groups. Some brought wagons loaded with lumber, others carried tools. Every able-bodied man from the settlement seemed to be riding toward Owen's homestead. Samuel Garrett led them. The old man sat tall in his saddle despite his age. Behind him rode Jake Reynolds, Thomas Thornton, the general store owner, the surveyor. Men Owen knew and men he didn't. young and old, rich and poor, all coming to build a barn. Behind the men came wagons driven by women, Margaret's stepsisters, the wives of settlers, even old Mrs. Fletcher who'd watched the original gathering with sad eyes. They brought food, pies, bread, stew, coffee, enough to feed an army. Samuel reined his horse to a stop in front of Owen. The old man's face showed determination and something else, repentance maybe, the need to make right what his son had made wrong. "We're here to build a barn," Samuel said simply. Owen found his voice. "I appreciate it." "Don't appreciate it, you earned it. Now let's get to work before this weather turns." Samuel dismounted and immediately took charge. He'd built more barns than anyone in the territory. New construction like Owen knew survival. The old man divided the men into teams with practiced efficiency. "Team 1, you're on foundation. Thomas, you lead that. Get the post holes dug, 4 feet deep, no exceptions." "Team 2, frame cutting. William, Robert, you're with me. We'll measure and cut everything before assembly." "Team 3, the strong backs. You'll be raising the frame once it's ready. Owen, you supervise that. Nobody knows this ground better." "Team 4, roofing. Need experienced carpenters for that. Jacob Miller, you've done roofs before. Take whoever you need." The work began with organized chaos. Men scattered to their assignments. Shovels bit into earth. Saws bit into wood. Hammers drove stakes to mark corners. The sound of construction filled the mountain air like music. Owen found himself working alongside men he barely knew, farmers and traders and craftsmen, all putting aside their own work to help him. The camaraderie reminded him of the war, of soldiers working together toward a common goal. Different uniforms, different backgrounds, but unified by shared purpose. The women set up tables near the cabin, laid out food, started fires for coffee that would need to flow all day. Margaret worked among them, no longer the outcast she'd been at the gathering. The women talked to her now, asked her questions, included her. The siege had changed how people saw her. Courage earned respect even in judgmental communities. By mid-morning, the foundation was complete. 8 posts set in perfect alignment, level and plumb. Thomas had learned well. The holes were exactly 4 feet deep, the posts perfectly vertical. Frame cutting took longer. Samuel and his team worked with carpenter's precision, measuring twice, cutting once. Each beam and joist had to fit exactly, or the whole structure would be weak. No room for error, no shortcuts. Owen walked among the workers, checking progress, offering suggestions where needed. But mostly he just watched men work together, watched his barn rise from ash and ruin, watched community function the way it was supposed to. Around noon, the dangerous part began, raising the frame. The main frame consisted of 4 massive timber sections. Each weighed several hundred pounds, required coordinated lifting by multiple men. One mistake could crush someone, kill them. Owen had seen it happen during the war. Frame raising was controlled violence against gravity. Samuel positioned 20 men around the first frame section, attached ropes, explained the commands. "On heave you lift, on hoe you hold. Nobody moves unless I say. Nobody lets go unless I say." "Understood." The men nodded, gripped their ropes. Owen positioned himself at the corner that would take the most stress. "Heave." 20 men lifted as one. The frame rose off the ground. Inches, feet, higher. Hoe. They held, muscles straining, ropes creaking under load. The frame hung suspended halfway to vertical. Heave higher. The frame passed the tipping point, started to lean vertical under its own weight. Then Owen heard it, a rope starting to fray, fibers popping under stress. "South side," he shouted. "More weight." Men rushed to reinforce the weakening side, added their strength to the effort. The frame stabilized, continued rising, reached vertical with a solid thunk as it locked into foundation brackets. Cheers erupted. The first frame was up. 3 more times they repeated the process. 3 more times they lifted hundreds of pounds of timber using nothing but muscle and rope and coordination. 3 more times the frames rose and locked into place. By mid-afternoon, the skeleton of a new barn stood against the Montana sky, 30 feet by 40 feet, 16 feet high at the peak, not as large as the old barn had been, but large enough, strong enough, built to last. The walls went up next, board by board, nail by nail. Men working in rhythm, one holding, one nailing, one measuring the next board. An assembly line of construction that turned lumber into shelter with satisfying efficiency. Roofing was the final challenge. Working at height, dealing with weight and wind and the growing cold. Jacob Miller led his team up ladders with boards and shingles. They moved with careful precision, every step calculated, every nail driven true. The sun touched the western peaks just as Jacob nailed the final shingle. He stood on the roof, raised his hammer, and shouted, "Barn's done!" The cheer that rose from 30 tired men echoed off the mountains, a sound of triumph, of community, of something good accomplished together. Owen stood back and looked at what they'd built. In one day, one long, brutal, beautiful day, they'd taken his burned ruin and transformed it into shelter, into hope, into proof that people could still work together when it mattered. Samuel climbed down from the roof and approached Owen. The old man's face showed exhaustion and satisfaction. "Good barn," Samuel said. "Very good barn, thank you. Thank all of us. This is what we're supposed to do. Take care of each other, build things that last." The women called everyone to eat. Tables groaned under the weight of food, pies and roasts and fresh bread and vegetables. More food than Owen had seen in years. The men descended on it like locusts, appetites sharpened by honest labor. Owen found himself sitting between Thomas and Jake, eating beef stew that warmed him from the inside out. Around him men laughed and talked and told stories. The darkness grew, but lanterns pushed it back. The community feast continued into evening. Samuel stood on one of the tables, called for attention. The crowd quieted. "Before we all head home," Samuel said, "I want to hear from the man whose barn we just built. Owen Blackwell, come up here." Owen felt every eye turn to him. Public speaking had never been his strength. Words tangled in his mouth, but Samuel gestured insistently. The crowd started clapping, no escape. Owen climbed onto the table, stood looking down at 30 faces illuminated by lantern light. Men who'd given their day to help him, women who'd fed everyone without complaint, a community functioning as it should. He cleared his throat, started to speak, stopped, started again. "I'm not good with words," Owen said. "Never have been, so I'll keep this simple." The crowd waited, patient. "When I came to this valley 14 years ago, I was alone, just me and a dead wife and a patch of land nobody else wanted." Owen paused, gathered his thoughts. "I thought being alone made me strong, thought not needing anyone was the same as surviving." He looked down at Margaret. She stood near the front watching him with those intelligent eyes. "Then someone tried to steal my land, and I learned something." Owen's voice grew stronger. "I learned I can't do this alone, learned that accepting help isn't weakness, it's wisdom." Murmurs of agreement rippled through the crowd. "My wife rode 200 miles through danger to save this place, did it without being asked, did it because it was right." Owen gestured at Margaret. "She's braver than most men I've fought beside, and I'm grateful she's here." Margaret's eyes glistened in the lantern light. Owen turned to Thomas. Her father admitted his mistakes, chose to be better instead of staying broken. That takes courage too. Different kind, but just as real. Thomas nodded, face showing emotion he couldn't quite hide. Owen looked at the young men he'd been teaching. These boys want to build their own homesteads, want to do it right. They're the future of this valley. Teaching them matters. Watching them learn matters. His gaze swept across the entire crowd. "I thought land was just dirt and water, property to own, but I was wrong." Owen's voice dropped, became quieter but more intense. "Land is legacy. What we build today, our children inherit tomorrow. What we teach today determines whether they survive." The crowd was absolutely silent now, listening. "I chose Margaret at the gathering because she helped a child when no one else would, because she had character, and character is what builds a land that lasts." Owen paused, let the words settle. All of you showed your character today. Built a barn for a man most of you barely know. Did it because it was right. Because that's what communities do. He met Samuel's eyes. Thank you. All of you. This barn will stand for decades. But what you taught me today, that'll last even longer. Owen climbed down from the table. The silence held for one more moment. Then applause began, slow at first, then building, then thunderous, men standing, women clapping, even the children joining in. Thomas approached through the crowd, stood in front of Owen, then did something unexpected. He held out his hand. "I want to say something," Thomas called out. The crowd quieted again. Thomas turned to face everyone. His voice shook slightly but held. "I was a poor father to Margaret, was ashamed when I should have been proud. Let fear make me weak. Let a criminal use me." He swallowed hard. "I forged documents that nearly cost Owen his land, nearly cost my daughter her life. I'll face charges for that. Probably should have faced them years ago." He turned to Margaret. "But you saved a man's land when no one else could, showed more strength than I've ever had. I'm sorry, for everything, and I'm proud to be your father, even though I don't deserve to be." Margaret stood frozen. Then she moved, walked to Thomas, looked up at him with tears streaming down her face. "I forgive you," she said simply. They embraced, father and daughter, broken and mending. The crowd wiped their eyes. Even the hardest men there felt the weight of that reconciliation. The feast continued late into the evening. Eventually, people began leaving, mounting horses, driving wagons back toward town, calling out goodbyes and promises to return for the next community workday. Samuel was among the last to leave. He shook Owen's hand firmly. "You've got a good woman there," Samuel said. "Treat her right." "I intend to. And those boys you're teaching, keep doing that. We need more homesteaders like you, men who know how to survive out here." "I'll keep teaching as long as they keep learning." Samuel mounted his horse, paused. "My son will go to trial in 3 months. The prosecutors already talked to me. They want to make an example, show that land theft won't be tolerated in the territory." "What's that mean for Silas?" 10 years, maybe more." Samuel's face showed pain. "He's my son, but he made his choices. Has to live with them." The old man rode away into the darkness. Owen stood watching until the last lantern disappeared into the trees. Margaret appeared beside him. Together they walked toward the new barn, stepped inside. The smell of fresh-cut lumber filled the space. Moonlight streamed through the high windows, illuminating support beams and sturdy walls. "It's beautiful," Margaret said. "It's functional. That's what matters." "No, it's both." She turned to face him. "You gave a good speech." "I meant every word." "I know you did. That's why it was good." They stood in comfortable silence. Two people who'd been strangers 6 weeks ago. Now partners. Now something more, though neither had quite defined it yet. "Owen," Margaret said quietly, "what happens after the trial? After Silas is sentenced? After everything settles?" "We keep working, keep building. That's what homesteading is. Constant work toward something permanent." "And us? Is this?" She gestured between them. "Is this permanent?" Owen considered the question. Considered Margaret, the woman who'd saved his land, who'd proven herself braver than soldiers he'd fought beside, who'd become essential to his daily life without him quite noticing when it happened. "I chose you at the gathering because I needed help," Owen said. "That was practical. But now," he met her eyes, "now I choose you because I want you here. Because you make this place better. Make me better." Margaret's breath caught. "That's not very practical." "No, it's not." "Good." She smiled, a real smile, the kind Owen hadn't seen from her before. "I was hoping you'd say that." 3 days later, Marshal Crawford returned with news. Owen and Margaret were working in the new barn arranging hay storage when the lawman rode up. "Got word from the territorial prosecutor," Crawford said, dismounting. "They've offered Silas a deal." Owen tensed. "What kind of deal?" 2 years in territorial prison, followed by permanent exile from Montana. He has to sell all his holdings, pay restitution to his victims, and never return. If he comes back, the original sentence applies. 10 years hard labor. And Thomas Thornton. Testimony in exchange for probation. He'll have a criminal record but no jail time. Judge thinks he's genuinely trying to make amends. Owen nodded slowly. Part of him wanted Silas to rot in prison for a decade. But another part, the part that had listened to Margaret and learned about mercy, saw the wisdom in exile. "What do you think?" Owen asked. Crawford shrugged. "I think Silas will take the deal. Prison's hard. 2 years is better than 10, and permanent exile means he's someone else's problem. Then I hope he learns something in those 2 years, though I doubt he will. Men like that rarely do." Crawford prepared to mount his horse. "Trial's set for January. You'll need to testify, you and your wife both. We'll be there." The marshal rode away. Margaret emerged from the barn, having heard everything. "He's getting off easy," she said. "He's getting exiled. Losing everything he's tried to steal, that's not nothing. But it's not justice. Maybe not, but it's practical. And it means we can move on, build our lives without constantly looking over our shoulders." Margaret considered that. "You're probably right. She paused. "I wanted him to suffer the way he made us suffer. He will, just differently. Being someone like Silas, always wanting more, always scheming, always losing, that's its own prison." The weeks before winter truly set in passed in constant motion. Owen and Margaret fell into efficient rhythms. He handled the heavy labor. She managed the household and accounts. But increasingly they worked side by side on tasks that required 2 people: cutting firewood, repairing fence, winterizing the cabin, preparing for months of isolation and cold. Every task was a lesson. Every lesson brought them closer, not through romance or grand gestures, but through shared competence, through learning to rely on each other. The Sunday teaching sessions continued. Owen's class had grown to 12 students now, men and boys eager to learn homesteading skills. Samuel Garrett had joined as a guest instructor, teaching the legal aspects of land claims and water rights. Owen taught practical skills: how to butcher a deer, how to smoke meat for long-term storage, how to build a proper root cellar, how to identify edible plants versus poisonous ones. Every lesson was life or death information. His students knew it, treated his teaching with appropriate seriousness. Thomas Thornton proved to be an exceptional student. The blacksmith attended every class, took notes, asked questions, then practiced what he'd learned. By November, Thomas had filed his own homestead claim, 20 miles north of Owen's land, good property near water. He'd start building come spring. One evening, Thomas stayed late after class, helped Owen stack firewood. They worked in silence for a while. Then Thomas spoke. "I'm leaving tomorrow, heading to Helena to give my testimony. Won't be back for a month." "Good luck with that. I wanted to ask you something first." Thomas set down an armload of wood. "Would you look after Margaret while I'm gone? I know she's with you already, but officially, make sure she's protected if anything happens to me." "Nothing's going to happen to you. You're testifying, not going to war." "Still, would you?" Owen nodded. "I was already planning to. She's my responsibility now." "More than that, I think." Thomas met Owen's eyes. "I see how you look at her, how she looks at you. That's not just responsibility. That's something else." Owen didn't deny it. "Maybe." "Then make it official. Marry her properly, not just some mountain ceremony forced by circumstances. Do it right." "I'll think about it." Thomas smiled slightly. "That means you've already decided. You just haven't told her yet." The blacksmith left. Owen stood alone at the growing dark, staring at the cabin where lantern light glowed in the windows, thinking about Thomas's words, about Margaret, about futures that had seemed impossible 6 weeks ago but now felt inevitable. Winter arrived in earnest the first week of December. Temperature dropped below zero. Snow fell daily. The world contracted to the space between cabin and barn. Everything beyond that became theoretical, dangerous, the killing cold that Montana was famous for. Owen and Margaret settled into winter routines. Mornings meant tending animals, breaking ice on water troughs, feeding hay to livestock, making sure everything survived another frozen night. Afternoons meant indoor work, repairs, planning for spring, reading. Margaret had found books in Owen's cabin, old volumes he'd bought years ago but barely looked at. She read them aloud while he worked on tools or carved useful items from scrap wood. Evenings they sat by the fire, talked, shared stories. Margaret told him about her childhood, about her mother who'd taught her to read, about her grandfather who'd explained law and property and civic duty, about growing up knowing she was different, unwanted, wrong somehow. Owen listened, didn't interrupt, didn't offer empty platitudes, just listened with the same focus he gave to everything else. One night she asked about Sarah. Owen had been avoiding the topic, but Margaret deserved to know. So he told her about meeting Sarah in Pennsylvania, about how her family had been poor, how the town had looked down on them, how Sarah had been mocked for her worn clothes and rough manners. "I chose her because she was kind," Owen said. "Everyone else saw poverty and shame. I saw someone who helped a sick child even though she had nothing to give." "Like me helping little Anne," Margaret said quietly. "Exactly like that. That's why I chose you. Saw the same quality, the same genuine goodness. But Sarah died. Consumption. 6 years ago. Nothing I could do. Just watched her fade." Owen stared into the fire. "Made me promise I'd keep this land, build something permanent, something that lasted. And you have. With your help." Margaret moved closer to him on the bench. "I'm not trying to replace her. I know. You're not her. You're yourself. That's what I want." They sat in silence. Then Margaret spoke again. "Owen, I need to tell you something." "I'm listening." "When you chose me at the gathering, I thought my life was over. Thought I was being punished, traded from one prison to another." She paused. "But you weren't a prison. You were freedom. You saw me as capable, useful, valuable. No one ever did that before. That's because you are all those things. I know that now, but I didn't know it then." She turned to face him fully. "You gave me that. Gave me the chance to discover what I could be, what I could do. I'll never forget that." Owen reached over, took her hand. Rough calluses, meeting rough calluses, the hands of people who worked for their survival. "I learned something too," Owen said. "Learned I don't have to be alone. Learned accepting help isn't weakness. You taught me that." "Then we're even." "No, we're partners. That's different." "Better different. Much better." January arrived with brutal cold. 20 below zero, 30 below some nights, the kind of cold that killed exposed flesh in minutes. Owen and Margaret stayed close to the cabin and barn, ventured out only when necessary, survived on stored food and fierce determination. But January also brought the trial. The journey to Helena took 4 days. Owen and Margaret traveled with Marshal Crawford and 2 deputies. They stopped at way stations, slept in crude shelters, pushed through snow and wind toward the territorial capital. Helena was the largest town either Owen or Margaret had ever seen, maybe 2,000 people, actual streets, multiple stores, a courthouse that looked like it belonged in civilization rather than wilderness. The trial lasted 2 days. Owen testified about the siege, about the forged documents, about Silas's threats and violence. Margaret presented the land office records, explained in clear, precise language how Silas's claims were fraudulent. Thomas testified about forging the surveyor's signature, about being coerced and threatened, about his genuine remorse. The prosecutor was harsh. Thomas's lawyer was adequate. The judge looked tired of hearing about land disputes. Silas Garrett sat at the defendant's table, smaller than Owen remembered, diminished by legal proceedings and the weight of his crimes. When the verdict came, Silas showed no emotion, just nodded. accepted 2 years in territorial prison followed by permanent exile. Outside the courthouse, Samuel Garrett waited. The old man looked like he'd aged a decade in 3 months. "I'm sorry," Samuel said to Owen, "for what my son did, for the trouble he caused." "Not your fault. Man makes his own choices." "Still, I raised him. Failed somewhere." Samuel paused. "I want to make you an offer." "I'm listening." "Come spring, I'm starting a new business, training program for homesteaders, teaching men how to file proper claims, avoid disputes, build sustainable operations." Samuel met Owen's eyes. "I want you to lead it, teach the practical skills. I'll teach the legal aspects. Together we can help this territory grow the right way." Owen considered the offer. Teaching had proven more rewarding than he'd expected. Watching men learn, seeing knowledge spread, building a legacy that outlasted buildings. How much time? 1 day a week, maybe 2 during spring and fall. Winter, you'd be free to manage your own land. Owen looked at Margaret. She nodded slightly. Encouraging. "All right," Owen said. "I'll do it." They shook hands. A partnership formed. 2 men trying to build something better from the wreckage of Silas's crimes. The journey home took 5 days. A storm slowed them. But eventually they crested the final ridge and Owen's homestead came into view. Snow covered everything, made it look pristine, untouched. The barn stood solid. The cabin waited with smoke rising from the chimney thanks to a neighbor who'd promised to keep the fire going. "Home," Margaret said simply. "Yes, home." They settled back into winter routines, but something had shifted. The trial was over. The threat was gone. For the first time in months they could think beyond immediate survival, could plan, could dream. One evening in late February, Owen made a decision. He walked to the small trunk where he kept his few precious possessions, pulled out a wooden box. Inside was Sarah's silver locket, the one he'd seen glinting on the day he chose Margaret. He brought it to Margaret, held it out. This was Sarah's, only valuable thing she ever owned. Owen opened the locket. Inside was a small portrait of Sarah, young, smiling, full of life. "She'd want you to have it." Margaret's eyes widened. "Owen, I can't. This is yours, your memory of her. It's mine to give, and I want you to have it." He pressed it into her hands. "You're not replacing her. You're continuing what she started, building a life worth living. That's what she'd want." Margaret clutched the locket. Tears streamed down her face. "Thank you for this, for everything. Thank you for saving my land, my life, me. We saved each other." "Yes, we did." March brought the first hints of spring. Longer days, warmer temperatures, ice breaking on the creek, the world waking from winter's grip. Owen expanded his Sunday teaching program. 20 students now, men from all over the territory. Some traveled 50 miles to attend. The barn that had been destroyed and rebuilt became a classroom, a place where knowledge transferred from one generation to the next. Samuel proved to be an excellent teaching partner. Where Owen taught practical skills, Samuel taught law and ethics. Where Owen showed how to build, Samuel explained why to build. Together they created a comprehensive program that turned enthusiastic amateurs into capable homesteaders. Thomas Thornton attended every class, but now he assisted Owen, demonstrated techniques, shared his own learning experiences. The blacksmith, who'd been weak and complicit, had transformed into someone useful, someone honorable. April arrived with wildflowers and possibility. Owen and Thomas rode north to survey Thomas's new claim. The land was good, rich soil, clear water, perfect southern exposure. They spent 3 days marking boundaries, planning cabin placement, discussing optimal locations for barn well and crops. "You'll do well here," Owen said, "only because you taught me how." Thomas paused. "Can I ask you something personal?" "You can ask." "Have you asked Margaret to marry you properly, I mean, not just that ceremony at the gathering?" Owen had been thinking about exactly that question. "Not yet." "Why not?" waiting for the right time. There's never a perfect time, but there are good times. This is a good time. Spring, new beginnings, hope. Owen nodded slowly. You're probably right. That evening, Owen prepared carefully, built up the fire, cooked a better meal than usual, cleaned himself, put on his best shirt, the one without patches. Margaret noticed. What's the occasion? Need an occasion to clean up. You never have before. Owen smiled slightly. Fair point. They ate dinner, talked about normal things, the livestock, the students, plans for spring planting. Then Owen cleared the table, set down 2 cups, poured coffee from the pot. Margaret, I need to say something. She looked up, curious, maybe slightly worried. When I chose you at the gathering, it was practical, strategic. I needed help. You needed protection. It made sense. Owen paused, gathered his words. But it's not practical anymore. It's not strategic. It's just what I want. What do you want? You, here, permanently. Not because it's convenient, not because we're stuck with each other, but because I can't imagine this life without you anymore. Margaret set down her coffee cup. Her hands trembled slightly. I'm not good at pretty words, Owen continued. Can't promise romance or poetry or anything like that. But I can promise honesty, partnership, a life built on shared work and shared purpose. He met her eyes. Will you stay? Not as my helper, as my wife. Chosen freely, wanted completely. Margaret's eyes filled with tears, but she smiled through them. Yes, of course yes. I've wanted you to ask for months. I was starting to think you never would. I'm slow about some things. I know, but you get there eventually. They kissed. First time, gentle, tentative. 2 people learning a new language together. When they pulled apart, both were smiling. One thing, though, Margaret said. I want a real ceremony, not the gathering, something proper, with witnesses who actually care about us. We can arrange that. The wedding took place in May. Small, simple, held in the new barn that represented everything they'd survived together. Samuel Garrett officiated. Thomas Thornton gave away the bride. Jake Reynolds stood as Owen's witness. 20 settlers attended, the same people who'd built the barn and rebuilt Owen's life. Margaret wore a new dress. First new dress she'd owned in years. The women of the settlement had helped make it. Light blue, simple, perfect. She wore Sarah's locket around her neck, a bridge between past and present. Owen wore his cavalry uniform, cleaned and pressed, the only formal clothing he owned. He stood at the barn's entrance watching Margaret walk toward him and felt something he hadn't felt in years, complete, whole, like pieces he didn't know were missing had suddenly fallen into place. The ceremony was brief. The celebration afterward lasted hours, food and music and dancing. Owen even danced with Margaret, poorly, stepping on her feet, making her laugh, but dancing nonetheless. As the sun set, as the celebration wound down, as the last guests departed, Owen and Margaret stood alone in their barn. Their land, their life. We did it, Margaret said. Did what? Built something that lasts. Isn't that what Sarah asked for? Owen nodded, looked around the barn, at the homestead beyond, at the students who'd learned and were building their own places, at the community that had come together, at the woman beside him who'd made all of it possible. Yes, he said, we built something that lasts, and we're still building, always will be. Good, Margaret said. I wouldn't want it any other way. They walked toward the cabin as stars emerged in the darkening sky. Behind them the barn stood solid. The land waited for spring planting. The future spread out like an unwritten page. Owen Blackwell had come to Montana Territory 14 years ago with nothing but grief and determination, had claimed land, had survived, had built a homestead, but he'd built it alone. Now he had something better, a partner, a community, a legacy. Students learning skills that would keep them alive, neighbors who worked together, a wife who'd proven braver than soldiers and more essential than any tool. The mountains had tried to break him. Silas had tried to destroy him. Winter had tried to kill him. But Owen had survived all of it, not through strength alone, through acceptance, through learning that asking for help was wisdom, not weakness, through choosing the right person at exactly the right moment. And that choice, mocked by everyone who witnessed it, had become the foundation of everything good in his life. Margaret Blackwell, nay. Thornton, once called worthless and unwanted, had saved a man's land, had proven her value beyond question, had transformed from victim to warrior to partner, and in doing so had given Owen something he'd lost when Sarah died. Hope. Not the desperate hope of survival, but the quiet hope of building, of teaching, of watching what you create outlast you, the kind of hope that turns homesteads into communities and communities into civilization. They entered their cabin, closed the door against the Montana night, and inside, by the fire's warm light, they began planning tomorrow's work. Because that's what homesteaders did. That's what survivors did. That's what people did when they had something worth building and someone worth building it with. The land would be here long after they were gone, but what they built on it, the knowledge they shared, the legacy they created, that would last even longer. Generation after generation. Teaching, learning, building, growing. And it had all started with one choice that everyone thought was foolish. Sometimes, Owen reflected, the best choices are the ones no one else understands.